and welcome to the NASIG 2020 session, Practical Approaches to Linked Data, presented by Heidi at the Smithsonian Libraries and Jeannie Hartley at the Friends University Library. Please refer to schedule for a complete biography of the speakers. We will be using the Zoom Q&A for questions during the session. Afterwards, please also participate in our online discussion forum, which can be located at the NASIG website with additional questions or comments about this session. NASIG's Code of Conduct applies to all discussions and presentations. The links to the forum and Code of Conduct are available at the NASIG website. Please tweet about this session using the hashtag NASIG 2020. We would like to thank the NASIG sponsors for helping us to make our online conference freely available.
Awesome, thank you. Good afternoon, my name is Jeannie Hartley with Friends University's Edmund Stanley Library, and I'm here with Heidi with the Smithsonian to discuss research and projects involving linked data. Welcome to our session. I'm going to talk about what linked data is, okay, and some benefits and challenges I discovered in my research, a bit about the process, and then provide some examples of real linked data projects. To begin, let's look at what linked data means. The interesting thing here is that linked data does not have a specific and limited definition. In my research, I've found several different definitions of linked data. However, the one Guarini and Pasamato posed was my favorite so far. They said that linked data is a set of best practices required for publishing and connecting structured data on the web for use by a machine. Linked data was developed by Tim Berners-Lee, the same gentleman who invented the internet. Just a note here, I really recommend that you take a look at Tim Berners-Lee's TED Talk entitled The Next Web of Open Linked Data. It's fascinating and inspiring to listen to him speak. Now, making data connectable by relationships is the key. For example, the book's author is one relationship. The author lives in Seattle, and that's a second relationship. And also, the author wrote this other title, and that's a third relationship. These are all relationships that can be included. This means using the semantic web, which is designed to allow for these relationships between data to be structured in a way that it can be read by computers. The semantic web has its own requirements, which I'll go over in a moment very briefly. The literature focused on two coding standards that can work well with linked data, though there are others. One is Research Description Framework, known as RDF, and one is Resource Description and Access, known as RDA, which is drastically less popular in the literature, but was used for linked data with a few projects due to the ease of using relationship designators, which are already part of the RDA vocabulary. For those of you who aren't heavily interested in cataloging, RDA MARC records are the most recent and most widely used standard for cataloging library records, developed for machines to read information so that it can be placed into a catalog card. RDF is a newly developed standard specifically put forth to meld well with the semantic web. RDF is written in XML, making it easier for a computer to understand and process. Both standards have been used to develop linked data with library records, and both have quite specific reasoning for what makes each standard work well. This URI FAQ link that I've got listed here can be a great resource for you if you need more information on URIs, how to get them, and what to do with them. And we'll talk about URIs here in a second as well. Another really useful tool is called MarcEdit 7. We learned about MarcEdit 7 at our 2018 NASIG pre-conference with Terry Reese and Eric Bergstrom. And it's a free tool, which is great, and you can download it, and it has a section specifically designed to update records and kind of play around in a sort of sandbox to see what you can do with your library records. This could potentially be used to get records ready for linked data en masse, and all it takes is seeing what your specific records need updated. As previously stated, relationships between data must be coded to connect them. And the cool thing about that is that each one in turn provides links to more information. This must follow a certain standard as well to fit within the semantic web framework. So let's take a look at the rules for the semantic web next. They look very simple, right? So URIs, that HTTP listing for each website you currently see, essentially is what we think of as a website link. These should be used for naming things. And then HTTP URIs, these are for when people want to look up the URI names, so each item gets its own HTTP identifier. When someone clicks on one of these URIs, the links must provide useful information using the RDF standard. And then you have to include links to other URIs so that patrons can find more data related to the search. Relationships to the information originally searched is here, so that the author's information and what other things may have been involved in. Just remember to check on that URI fact sheet I shared on the last slide if you need more guidance here. If these things are done properly and a standard of coding that is compatible with linked data is used, then linked data connects information to look a bit like this diagram. This is an example of the linked data of Web of Things. Tim Berners-Lee imagined that linked data would emerge as a representation of real things in web format, much like this diagram illustrates. I pulled this diagram from DBpedia, and I have provided the web link here if anyone is interested in that information. I know you can't really read each bubble, but it's a great visual for what linked data actually looks like. Pesha and Miller discussed DBpedia as a great example of a website that currently uses linked data in real time with data uploaded by numerous entities, such as Drug Bank, Global Health Observatory, the New York Times, and NASA, which all have data sets linked on DBpedia. Each of the bubbles on this web image represent one of those entities, and they're categorized by subject, with each subject given a color to track on the map. The connections start to get pretty dense, making it look like everything is all connected. Looking at some benefits, making information interoperable between applications is another thing Tim Berners-Lee was really interested in, because making information capable of bridging gaps so that multiple platforms can process the same data can be really useful. The best example that he gave in his TED Talk was his discussion of social media. His example was, if you find a person on one social media site, and you wanted your other sites to also recognize that person as a friend, that does not currently work right now because there's no data interoperability between those applications. Increased richness of data is an occurrence caused by the amount of relevant information provided at once, which can be sifted through easier than, for example, when you pop something into Google search and have over 200,000 results, of which maybe 100 are relevant to your query. With linked data, you may get fewer results, but all of them will be relevant to your query. Geolocation data is used more for mobile devices. If you have ever searched information on your phone, have you noticed that information populates based on what is closest to you? This is how geolocation data works. And when making library linked data available online, your library will populate data about your materials every time one of your patrons search about something you have to offer. Conversion tools are available through the Library of Congress Bibliographic Framework Initiative, which is one ongoing project using linked data last I saw, and is known as the BibFrame Initiative. These conversion tools are particularly helpful if you're transitioning away from RDA MARC to use RDF. Some challenges. These were actually really interesting. Making records complete and consistent is a challenge because sometimes records do not have everything entered, or maybe things are done inconsistently. These things have to be fixed before data can be published so that everything will connect properly. But you can use tools like MarcEdit to make this process easier. Ensuring proper relationship designators is a big deal because all the data is going to be connected using these designators. This was the biggest argument in favor of using RDA because there's already a set of vocabulary for relationship designators in RDA. The process of converting data discovers conversion errors with data as it is changing over. These things have to be updated in order to continue the process of publishing data. There are lots of conversion tools out there to help with this. These three things all cause time and efficiency issues, which end up using more resources to make linked data happen. Transitioning away from MARC is also a huge change, and libraries are wary of doing something different from what they're used to, especially if that library is transitioning to RDF and they're unsure about writing the background XML code. Finally, Arleach et al. Discussed that libraries involved in their semantic web identity project were individually confused about what they needed to be doing on the individual level. Some things to remember. As illustrated by the discussion regarding RDF and RDA, the literature did determine that no one individual format for library resources is going to be perfect for using linked data, and that there will be elements of each one that pose issues, as well as elements with each one that make themselves beneficial to the process. There are too many types of resources and too many different ways that they can meld with or clash with any one standard. Library relevance is a huge discussion that most libraries are having, and linked data is definitely something that, if implemented thoroughly, could solidify library relevance in a very visible way. Linked data could end up possibly extending digital library presence in that it could cause an increase in entities digitizing materials to make them available or save more of them. There were two unexpected challenges that I discovered. The first and most obvious in retrospect is that libraries may not implement simply because librarians are confused. This general confusion about how to implement and the steps involved can easily prevent libraries from moving forward. This was the most surprising of my findings, though based on the lack of solidity and agreement with just the definition of linked data, this should have been foreseen. The second that I had not considered was that copyright might become an issue as linked data is implemented by more institutions. Law-related issues like this are big enough that some libraries may entirely forego the whole process out of nervousness or concern for doing it wrong. To that end, having examples to follow of what other libraries and entities have done can make a huge difference in combating these challenges, which leads me to some projects I discovered in my research. There are a number of linked data projects which are underway either currently or are fully functioning, which can serve as great examples of what to do and how to do it. I have listed them here. Also included in this slide is the Smithsonian's PCC URIs in MARC, and I'll now let Ms. Bertu take over to give you more information about how that works. And here are my references.
Hello, everyone. I am just going to share my screen here. Okay. Hopefully everyone is seeing my slides.
Yes, you're good.
Great. So my name's Heidi Bertu. I'm with Smithsonian Libraries, and I want to say thank you to the organizers for going ahead with this virtual conference and making it freely available. I deeply appreciate the labor that went into this event, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to present today. And thanks also to Jeannie for getting us off to a good start. As a member of the Smithsonian family, I would like to say that the Smithsonian Libraries and Archives stand with the Secretary of the Smithsonian, Dr. Lonnie Bunch, in expressing our deepest sympathy to the families and communities impacted by discrimination and violence. I thank the NASIG board for tapping the Equity and Inclusion Committee for our assistance in drafting our statement against racism. And because talk is cheap, I also thank the NASIG board for making a donation in the amount of $500 to support Black Lives Matter. Before I go into any specifics on our linked data projects, I need to stress here that linked data at Smithsonian is very much a team effort, and I am one person of many involved in these projects. So I'm the one reporting these efforts to you, but it would be wrong to assume that this work was mine and mine alone. So at Smithsonian, we're doing lots of experimenting right now with linked data. So we're adding linked data to our records in our ILS, which is Horizon, but we have no way to make use of that data. It is still completely siloed. but we're still participating in the Program for Cooperative Cataloging's URIs in MARC pilot program because we want to be part of that conversation. This is all work that is being done with the future in mind. Our wiki base is still in its infant stages, so we don't know quite where it's going to go yet, but we're finding there's a lot of momentum behind this project, and I'm going to talk more about that in a bit. There are also some adjacent projects that we've kind of slyly built into our linked data work. So there's an ongoing fast headings project where we have been adding these headings to our bibliographic records. Right before we left for enhanced telework, we also imported fast into our authority file. We have made changes to our import profiles so that we are allowing vocabularies beyond LCSH to be more inclusive in our description. And we have also taken this opportunity to implement PCC's guidelines for minimally punctuated records. And you'll see some examples of that in just a bit. So while we were on site, we were adding linked data elements to our records daily through the use of our linked data import macro. So my colleague Jackie Shea, our descriptive data management librarian, began work on this macro a year ago now. And a few months into that development, we heard about the PCC pilot project, which officially began in November of 2019. So this turned out to be a really happy coincidence for us. So for those who may be unfamiliar with that pilot project, I'll just paraphrase a bit from some introductory emails that we received from Xiaoli Li and John Reamer. So those participating in the URIs in MARC pilot are metadata practitioners who are, quote, road testing linked data work to see what issues and questions arise. You could choose to do this work either in bibliographic or authority records. And the expected end product would be to test and develop PCC best practices for some of the areas the linked data best practices group earlier identified. So Smithsonian Libraries opted to actively participate only on the bib record side of this pilot, but we are still paying very close attention to what's happening with authority records. So development of this linked data macro for us went through several phases. So Jackie would do a lot of developing, and then I would stress test the macro, as would our head of serials and electronic resources. So our final version of the macro does a number of things for us. So you can see this kind of macro express language on the left-hand side of your screen here. So after you have exported your bib records from OCLC, you would run this macro. The macro would then call up MarcEdit. It takes your record set through a series of tasks, saves and converts your file, and then imports the records into the ILS. So some of the tasks that this macro calls are native to MarcEdit, things like RDA helper and build linked records. So build linked records queries linked data services and returns URIs to populate the subfield 0, which is that authority record control number, and the subfield 1, your real world object URI. And then some of these task specs were built by Jackie, and this is where we did a lot of those testing runs. So those are the tasks that strip punctuation and add the 758. So the 758 field is the resource identifier, and in adding this field, we are following steps outlined in the PCC task group on linked data best practices final report. And as for the punctuation, we have taken what I'm realizing is a somewhat radical step to decide to follow the guidelines outlined in the PCC report on minimally punctuated records, where we are stripping both the terminal and the medial punctuation from bibliographic records on import. So the medial punctuation is the punctuation between subfields. So this rollout, which happened in January of this year, involved a lot of coordination between myself and Jackie and other units involved in cataloging. So my team in resource description is already accustomed to using macros. So this was just a new macro on their available menu. Where we had to do a lot of coordination was with the technology updates with our library web services team. So these were things like making sure all the machines involved in cataloging had MarcEdit, had those relevant task files installed so that everything would run smoothly. The biggest change that we saw with our workflow is how we handle authority records. So prior to this macro, catalogers were accustomed to importing related authority records at that point of cataloging. So they would export the bibs, they would export the authority records at the same time and import them. We can't do that now because we can't put authority records through the linked data macro. So Jackie and I have been working on procedures for a new authority upload batch process that happens post-cataloging, and we are testing those procedures right now. And believe me when I say this could be a whole presentation unto itself. As a happy bonus, we have found that this batch process suits our enhanced telework status, so it's something that we can keep moving even while we're out of the office. We have also discovered in this telework environment that our macros don't work because of timing issues with remote desktop. So we are using this opportunity to train people on how to do things the long way, which is not necessarily a bad thing. So I have some example records to show y'all, and I am using artist books because those are the materials I tend to catalog. And I'm going to show you phases in this macro development so you can see the difference. So here we are in our kind of first test run stage, our experimental phase on this macro. And you can see that the macro is bringing in those subfield zeros and subfield ones where it's finding them. It's populating the 1XX and the 3x fields for us. Same thing with our 6XX fields, bringing in those URIs where it's locating them. It's adding in the 758 field, and you see we started this macro with a little tracking field in the 945 telling us that we had put this record through the linked data process. As we refined this and got to the final version of the macro, you will see the big change here is not the linked data. We're still pulling those in, those subfield zeros and subfield ones, but now the punctuation has been stripped out. So if you look at that 245 field, for example, there is no punctuation between the subfields. There's no punctuation between the subfields in the 264, the 300. Same thing again, we're pulling in the URIs where we could find them for the 6XX fields. We're still slotting in that 758 field, but now we have changed our tracking somewhat. So we've moved that into a 959. We have our initials, date, and then the note that the linked data and FAST was processed. So that is a very quick introduction to this linked data macro. And now I'm going to zip right into a very quick introduction on Wiki Data. And I want to apologize that this is so fast because Wiki Data deserves much more time than I'm able to give it here. So Jackie and I had planned to do an entire NASIG pre-conference on Wiki Data that was unfortunately canceled, but you know, maybe next year, maybe there's some interest. So Wiki Data stores the data used in Wikimedia projects like Wikipedia, but it stores it as structured data in the form of simple relationship statements. So this means it's a really great way to educate staff on the triple statement structure, right, of subject, predicate, and object. So the key here are these relationships, and these relationships are built on items in Wikidata, which are represented by Q numbers. So you have your two items, your subject and your object, and then you connect those with the Wikidata property represented by a P number. And that shows the relationship between those items. If you're at all interested in Wiki Data, you can get a free account and start editing data. It is open to anyone who wants to play around with this. So as an example, we'll talk about Lonnie Bunch, who's the secretary of the Smithsonian Institution. So here is Dr. Bunch's Wiki Data page. You can see that he has been established and his Q number is right there in parentheses next to his name. And then below, you'll see there's that area statements where you can start making relationships between other items in Wiki Data back to Lonnie Bunch. So as an example, we can see in the employer section, we have built these relationships to Smithsonian Institution, to the California African American Museum, and the Chicago History Museum. So if we were to think about that as a triple, we would see that the subject, Lonnie Bunch, is connected to these objects, these other museums, by this relationship of employer. So that is our predicate there. So again, we are in the very early days with Wikidata work, but we are lucky to have an experienced Wikimedian on staff. So that's Diane Shaw, our rare book cataloger, special collections cataloger, excuse me. And Jackie, Diane, and I have convened a Wikidata team. So this started out with members from the resource description team, the metadata department, our colleagues in cataloging over at Fair Sackler, and we began meeting last November and holding Wikidata edit-a-thons because we are all learning this together. We've identified some goals and areas of interest here, so we are looking for new ways to manage identities. And there are also several collections in our libraries that simply aren't represented well in Horizon, or they have significant local vocabularies built up around them. So our art and artist files or our index of African art are great examples of this. So collections like these may eventually find a home in Wikidata. We also have a local wiki base that is under development. So a wiki base is your local instance of a Wikidata repository that you can populate with locally developed properties that have those relationships that you need. We've had some early victories here. So we've relatively quickly found support for this project across the Smithsonian, coming from the Office of the Chief Information Officer and from multiple colleagues within museum and archival units. We've also created the Smithsonian P number in Wikidata, which is P7851, and that signifies the relationship of it identifies a resource held by the Smithsonian Institution. So now that we have that relationship established in Wikidata, we can create those connections between resources and their home museum or their home branch library. And there is a method for creating those new properties in Wikidata if you need to express a relationship that isn't represented yet. We have also had on-site training with Andrew Lee, who is kind of Wikimedian extraordinaire, has done multiple trainings, has published books on this topic, and he has developed some online tools for us. So I am going to attempt to do an online demonstration of this right now. So I'm going to stop sharing my slides. I am going to pull this tool up here on my screen, and I'm going to talk my way through the entire thing. So here I am sharing a tool that Andrew Lee built for us, and this is built on a Google API developed by Tom Steiner. And what this does, if it works, so fingers crossed here, is you can type in a name. So I'm going to give it Suzanne Collins, who is an author, and it is going to search, great, it is going to search Wikidata. It's going to pull in the Q number for the author, and it's going to pull in the VF number. So this is something we had developed because our art librarian said, hey, we have all of these artists and we're going to search them one at a time in VF to see if they have VF numbers. And we thought, oh no, we could do it this way. Then you can just copy and paste a whole a whole bunch of names in there at once, pull back all those VF numbers. And you can use this kind of tool in other ways as well. This is just one example of how we're using it. So I'm going to stop this share and head back on over to my slideshow. Okay. So that is just an example of an online tool we've developed. Okay, sorry, getting my screens organized here. So the other thing we have discovered is that Wiki Data is great for telework. And we have seen a whole new energy and momentum around the Wiki Data team. So colleagues from other departments now want to join in because maybe their work isn't as portable, or maybe they're just looking to pick up some new skills and see how this could be relevant to collections that they serve. And it's been very easy for us to bring people into the group. We have everything organized online via shared documentation, so it hasn't been a huge challenge. In this telework environment in particular, we have been working on data modeling discussions. We have been selecting properties for creation in our local Wikibase, creating properties there, and then recording P numbers. We also are doing our own Wikibase training with Wikimedia Deutschland tomorrow. And we have a number of questions for them on data modeling and nesting items and properties, understanding data types, if we can batch import structured data. So I trust that that workshop is going to be a very productive session. So I will say thank you right now. I have a number of resources listed on my slides here that I will make sure to share, but thank you very much for your time and attention.
Hi, this is Mandy again, and we do have a few questions here. Bjorn asks, hi, can you speak a bit more on how library relevance can be helped by linked data? Are there specific types of content that will get better visibility and thus add the visibility and relevance of the library?
Sure. One of my favorite things about implementing linked data as a library is that you can kind of do it so that all of your materials are available. And what I mean by that is, say a patron that is in your service area decides, oh, there's this new book and I really want to buy it. They're not even thinking about libraries, and they're not even thinking about the fact that they can read it without having to buy it. So they just go online to Google and type in, you know, whatever title by whatever author. And one of the listings that pops up is your library listing with the title, the author, the call number, all the necessary information. And then they say, oh, yeah, I can go to my library and check this out. And you can do that with all of your reference and your archives and all of your things that you do allow people to come see. Maybe you do or don't let them check it out and they have their own requirements, but you can do the same thing with all of your materials.
So just to add to that, an example from Smithsonian. So we have a collection in the African Art Museum where the branch librarian has worked hard for years in developing this very nuanced and extensive local vocabulary to describe these items. And it is not in LCSH, and it is, I mean, she has put so much effort and work into this, and it's really incredible. So I'm in discussions with her right now to see, is this something where she would want to go through that process of proposing all of these terms to get them into LCSH, or should we take that vocabulary that she has created and put it into Wiki Data where it can then be shared and built on and used by other institutions?
Thank you. Jim Rickerson asks, what is the end result of creating Wikidata information going to be for the users of your library?
So I just shared one potential, result, but this work is very new. So I think we're learning all the time how this could change what we do. And we've seen some European national libraries start to move their identity and authority management into Wiki Data. So I think there are a lot of possibilities. What I am most excited about are things like these vocabularies, these local vocabularies that fill gaps in LCSH that we could make available. So that's kind of where my head is right now, but there are so many more possibilities that I am missing. If my colleague Jackie were here, I am sure she would have more to add on this.
Okay, Stella Tang asks a question to Smithsonian. There are usually multiple personal records on VF for the same person, and it is not unusual that the records are different. Hang on a minute. Okay, from the LC authority file. How do you do authority control, or do you just search and link to the VF records?
So this is a really great question. So Jackie and I have also been developing a post-load reconciliation step where we make sure that we have pulled in the correct URI for the person, because we had, gosh, how long ago did we do this project? We had a project that I didn't even discuss in this presentation, where we kind of went through this work for a smaller subset of records from special collections. And as we were stepping through there, we noticed that we were having this issue where we were getting mismatches, and we had to do this kind of, this post-load reconciliation. So that is something that we need to build out for this authority process, and we just haven't gotten there yet. But we are paying attention to that.
Thank you. Anne Williams asks, have you seen the recent discussion of assigning trigger notes to records for items that have content some find troubling? Would linked data facilitate this better than Marc?
Hi, so I will say I don't know if I've seen the most recent discussion. At my previous institution, I was actually a person who added content warnings to items in MARC for a very specific collection that we held. I honestly have never considered if linked data would be better for that than MARC. I mean, the way I was doing it in MARC was just as either a quoted note, if the creator had added their own content warning, or, you know, as just kind of an unstructured note. That's an interesting question, though. Thank you for that. I will have to do more research on my own.
Thank you. We have an anonymous attendee who asked, one thing that was mentioned as a challenge to implementing LD was issues with copyright. How does copyright enter as a consideration or deterrent for those libraries?
You know, the interesting thing about that is that I had never even considered that copyright might be an issue. But then when I continued reading about it, it really ended up focusing on when you're linking your information to the internet, and exactly what you're putting out on the internet is what makes a difference. So if you're linking out, maybe it's a book and you put out there the description of the book or reviews of the book, making sure that you are referencing the appropriate individuals, and that kind of stuff is one really good example. You just kind of have to be really aware of what you're putting out there.
Thank you. Elizabeth McDonald asks, will linked data work well with repository items?
Repository items meaning like in archives?
That would be my guess.
I would assume that it would. I think that it would work the same way as if you were putting information about other materials out there. You would maybe include some information about the availability of those archives, especially if they're archives that you don't check out, and most libraries don't check out archival materials unless they're part of a particular collection that is permitted to circulate in the community. But yeah, I think that it really could. I think that if you really want to get your archives information out there, then linked data could really help to tell your community, hey, you know, we have this information, and especially if somebody's doing research, that might bring them to your library to investigate your archives on that material.
Yeah, and I think my colleagues at the Smithsonian on the digital library side of the house are definitely paying close attention to linked data projects and are participating in our linked data projects.
Thank you. Susan M. Sheldon asks, how do you deal with broken links?
Broken links like a URI mismatch?
Again, that would be my guess.
Okay, so I think that gets back to the kind of reconciliation process that we had developed on small scale for the special collections project we did, and now we have to figure out how to implement that as a normal routine as we move more into bringing these URIs in as a matter of course. So we just haven't come up with that aspect of the work yet, but it is on our radar as something we need to develop.
Thank you. Elizabeth Lilka asks, what do you do with authors who aren't in NAF or VIAF? Do you create authority records?
Yes, so we are a member of NACO, so we create authority records. We were also thinking about experimenting, or at least I was thinking about experimenting with having folks who are in the Wiki Data team, if they find a name that isn't in the National Authority file and isn't in Wiki Data, creating the name in Wiki Data. Because you don't need to go through that same kind of NACO training to do things in Wikidata. So it makes it more accessible and it makes it a more inclusive project.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. Cindy Tan has a question for Heidi. Could you share what APIs we use to create the automation of finding VF links?
I can share that with you after the presentation, but I do not have that information right in front of me. But please send me an email and I would be happy to share that with you.
Perhaps it could also be shared on the NASIG forum for your session.
I could share it on the NASIG forum as well, as soon as I have the information. Thanks, Mandy.
Sorry.
Okay.
Well, actually, we probably have time for one more question if anybody has one.
And actually, this goes for another 5 minutes, doesn't it?
Oh, yes, actually, sorry. My clock is slightly off. How's that for helpful? So, any more questions? No? No more questions. Okay.
We have one from Anna Marie Close that just came in.
Oh, okay. Terrific. Thank you. Can the first speaker expand on copyright considerations with linked data?
Really, the only thing that I can say about the copyright is don't put anything out there that you can't say where it came from. Because if you put something online and you can't say where it came from, then there's a chance that the person that it did come from is going to notice it. honestly, I can't really expand any further on that. I feel like it's pretty straightforward. Did you have a specific question, or is it just kind of out there about copyright? I know copyright is a scary thing because anything involving getting sued is terrifying. So yeah, that's really the main thing that I would say. Make sure you're aware of what you're putting out there.
Okay, the response was it was more of an ambiguous statement.
Okay.
We have another question. What are the cost issues linked with what are the cost issues with linked data?
Yeah, sorry, this is Heidi. I'm trying to think. I mean, I don't know off the top of my head, excuse me, monetary cost, but there's obviously time that you will need to allocate time to train people to do something new. So that is a cost. But I feel like, well, sorry, now I'm just thinking off the top of my head, which is always dangerous. But I suppose in what I've seen, the biggest cost is making that time and space to do training, to look at workflows, to look at procedures.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for attending this NASIG 2020 session. This recording will be posted to our YouTube channel in the coming weeks. The speakers will be monitoring the NASIG forum through June 2020 for any questions not covered during this session. Please join us again in 10 minutes for our next session. And thank you to Heidi and Jeannie for their very informative session. Thank you all.